part of this session. Yeah, there you are. I'll start again. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Pivot 0x Masterclass. My name is Shantanu Sharma, and I head the operation at Pivot. For all those who do not know about us, Pivot is a global Web3 venture, the most generating early stage startups space. And I invite you all to follow us on our social channel to know more. Share the social media channel. As such, so 0x Hub is an open masterclass initiative by Pivot, where we want to enable the startups and aspiring founders with knowledge from within the industry. All our sessions will be led by experts in the field, founders, investors, CEOs, heads of ecosystem, like what we have today. It's my ultimate pleasure to invite our mentor for today, Soyam Shah, head of ecosystem strategy and investments at Zeta Chain. We conduct this session today. Zeta Chain, as we all know, is an L1 blockchain for chain abstraction, build omni-chain apps that manage chains, Ethereum. Thank you so much, Swayam. I'll add it over to you. Make a small introduction for yourself, and then we can.
Yeah, sure.
Yours. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for the intro. I think I'll just share my screen and get started. And can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so perfect. I'll start that, right. So yeah, a quick background on my end. So I've been in crypto blockchain space since 2016, 2017, mainly a research background into crypto economics, protocol design, and ecosystem design. So ecosystem design is where I did my research into self-sustaining ecosystem, or the framework on how to build a good ecosystem, and more about the mindset required to break down the steps and give a proper framework for the projects to build a good project, and just to be mindful of the steps and create a proper timeline from going from A to B. And I practice ecosystem design, crypto economics at various institutions, projects, startups. I worked with Dutch government back in 2019, 20 for their blockchain architecture. That was more of a DLT design into enterprise technology, but had the very essential pieces of blockchain within it. Then I continued with Smith and Crown, which was again more like a McKinsey for protocol design, more consulting facing and research. At Binance, I used to lead research, and I ended up managing the ecosystem infra, the BNB Greenfield project, which is the storage project. So did various roles, but at the very core, it was more about ecosystem, how to design them, actively finding problems, proactively talking to the projects, and figuring out how to structure them, how to give them a better edge within the ecosystem and help them scale beyond just L1. And then we are working at Zeta Chain currently as a mainly ecosystem strategy, but more into grants, investments, a bit of BD, but everything. It's a more of a helicopter view role, helping teams find the solutions and just making sure we have good infrastructure, especially for the developers to build good projects. And over the timeline, I've worked with various different projects as advisor, practice ecosystem design with them, along with them. Yeah, so I'll just use this session to bring few of my feedback, insights to here, and yeah, to see if you pick something that you think is super relevant for your project. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and happy to discuss them here. So yeah, like what are self-sustaining ecosystems, and what do we mean by self-sustaining ecosystems? So when we think of a self-sustaining ecosystem, it's all about value being created, distributed, maintained, exchanged, and stored within the ecosystem. And while having the resilience to the external factors, that could be security, or that could be competition, or that could be just uh, changing dynamics of the technological protocols. And one of the core principles that we adopted, or the values that we get, are from anti-fragile ecosystems, or something that Nassim Taleb wrote in his book. Those are core principles where ecosystems should thrive in chaos, and it's always going to be a chaos. So I think it's all about figuring out uh, the sweet spots where you can double down and build value, and probably also able to capture the value back. So, like, what is design thinking, and how do we approach it? So, it mainly follows principles of systems thinking and complex systems. So, system thinking is just taking a helicopter view and looking at a system. So, maybe a good example is like how a car works, and every element of the car in itself is working. It's a building block, like wheels or acceleration system. Everything is built upon each other, so you cannot really solve a problem looking at just one thing. It's the entire thing. And probably there are a few things where it requires more detailed approach, which is more analytical thinking. But ecosystem design, or ecosystem designing, is all about having the helicopter view, looking at the entire picture, and understanding the gaps and where it could be done well. And especially the connections with the other systems as well, which is part of the entire ecosystem. So essentially, game theory and mechanism design are the core pillars of doing ecosystem design. So game theory is where you look at the games and analyze them. So how a protocol works, script economics, protocol design. But like when you are actually want to achieve a specific goal, then you need to design the rules of those games, and that's where mechanism design comes in. All protocols you see out there, even on the application level, Uniswap, DYDX, anything, they're all results of mechanism design. Next is like how exactly, what are the foundations of ecosystem? And if we just break down the entire DLT, or blockchain in general, like the nodes talk to each other, which is basically how they talk. There's network topologies, and how they come to a common consensus are different trust assumptions with trust mechanisms. And these are basically, if we boil it down to the steps, it's stakeholders, value exchange network, architecture, governance modeling, and tokenomics. So this is a core framework. I'll go into much detail about this uh, in the subsequent slides. But this is something I see, or this is something that I worked as a research on ecosystem design, on how to create a self-sustaining ecosystem. So entire framework is divided into three major sections. One is discover, design, and deploy. Now, discover is all about the first steps. Now, this could be a concept, or this could be a minimum viable product. The product what works very well into this entire design, because then you are literally iterating for GTM, for the go-to-market. For proof of concept, I think you're still figuring out the proper product market fit. And I think it still requires more work uh, to follow this framework. But I think the most apt uh, the framework is most apt for the minimum viable products out there. Or and the goal from is not a product, the goal is ecosystem. So even if your application, you are probably interacting with multiple stakeholders. Now the stakeholders could be validators, investors, team, co-founders, uh, developers, projects. There are numerous stakeholders, and they keep changing. And as per the timeline, the importance of each stakeholder is different, and how you realize and how they realize the value, and where as an ecosystem where you stress the value of something is the most critical element of success, or just having a good sustaining ecosystem. So the goal of this framework is more understanding and breaking down things in different steps. But it's also more about understanding that we are aiming to create a minimum viable ecosystem, and it's not about just a product stage. Because you are in blockchain, it's very difficult to pursue it as a single standalone building block. It starts there, but I think there are the opportunities or the value capture lies in what you can do upon that. So if you just double down into the Discord part, it's more about problem structuring, the stakeholder mapping, and value exchange mapping. So stakeholder mapping is where exactly, as a project, you get more insights into where your core stakeholders are, what are they exactly expecting from an ecosystem. So and all the incentives are different. Like as an investor, the incentives are very different from the validator. Like what a validator is expecting, the timeline they're expecting, the rewards they are expecting is very different from an investor. Same as a team, same as a product and projects. Like my core experience comes from L1s, working with them, but I also work with projects. But essentially, where I'm coming from is more L1 perspective on what is required as a project to work with a L1, and also the way around, like what we as L1s are usually looking for projects to do. And then the next step is value exchange mapping. Now, value could be anything here. Value could be in form of data, but usually, like in crypto, we see everything is notified as a token. Now, token could be anything. It could be medium of exchange. It could be data. It could be anything that ecosystem finds value in. So the value exchange map. So whenever you figure out your stakeholders, the next step is how they interact with each other, and once they interact, what exactly are they exchanging? And I think that's where we run into the core concepts of design, policies, which basically runs into governance modeling. So all the systems which are on chain, governance, DAOs, everything, I think those are much easier to deploy and maintain. But I think the problem is managing the off chain with on chain. And that's where I think the governance decisions are something uh, more important. We have seen over the period of last few years how the governance has changed. It's more running towards a decentralized, but there is always a centralized element playing around the projects, which makes sense. I think there's a decentralized this there's a spectrum for decentralization, but as soon as you are at the very end of that spectrum, I think it's very important to understand the governance and what exactly you are governing, how you're governing, the communication required, how you're making the decisions, and most important, the transparency with the community. And I think the core part of the entire uh, blockchain, Web3, anything, any DLT system is more about uh, how you bind everything together, and that's where the token itself comes in. But while designing a token, like it could be divided more into three different columns, which is market design, mechanism design, and token design. uh, Market design is mainly thinking more off-chain, of your target audience, how much your project could take upon, also on the security risk. But and then there is a on-chain elements which are more into what as a user gets out of it. It could be financial incentives, it could be lucrative token policies, or just digital rights could be in form of NFT or anything. But I think those elements of balancing off-chain with on-chain is the critical part, and that's where the mechanism design physically plays the role. There is no At least in my experience, there is no one right answer. I think it keeps changing with each iteration. But what is most important is to learn from those iterations and extract core insights, or it could be questions. But I think at the end, this is more experimental, where you stick to one core thesis that you are going for as a project, complete the cycle until being a minimum viable ecosystem, and then just go for the next iteration, which the next iteration could look like a product upgrade or protocol changes, or any smaller or major things. But the cycle changes, how you approach your governance token, everything changes with the made with time. uh, and a very good example here is DYDX. I think they started as an application on Ethereum, and now they are a Cosmos chain. And over the period of time, they have gone through different phases of change. But essentially, what we have seen, the value capture as a project happens as a layer. I think the token itself gets a value when it's a gas token. There's more avenues to occur the value and the utility of the token. But I think this is more different right now. I think the adoption for the Web3 is much better than what it was before. And I think this is going to increase from this point. And as a project, I think the entire market is widening. But how to focus on one thing on, and how to align your incentives are the core are the core uh, insights that you can bring in. So as a network, I think if you take the token, you can divide it into two parts. One is ledger layer and one is the market layer. Like the token itself of Ethereum also works for its protocol layer on managing its stakeholders, which are validators. But at the other one, it's also the market layer on how you perceive as a project, uh, the community, the governance, every small little thing is important. Uh, as a part of the token, and token basically encapsulates everything. So, but I think one of the core concept to understand for tokens is usually token gravity. Uh, So there are two core pillars. One is volume, one is velocity. So volume, a good example is Bitcoin. Like just take, it has a lot of volume. Like it could be perceived as more store of value, but at the same time, it lacks the velocity. I think there are so many L2s coming on Bitcoin, other different. Even Zeta Chain has an access to Bitcoin to get more utility there, which basically brings more velocity to the token. And I think as a token or as a project, I think this is very important to be mindful. Or if you're aiming for a volume, or if you're aiming for velocity, but at the core, I think that needs to be a fluid movement between the volume and velocity to capture the network effects and bring in the value for all the stakeholders. And I think at the end, like if you break down the digital assets, there are different types of tokens. Uh, yeah, I don't think so. This is something everyone is aware about this different utility tokens, security tokens, which are more termed as RWS these days. Uh, but at the core, these are the assets on chain. Uh, I see them as more of a vehicle to capture the value back. But I think that's the essential part of how you think about deploying the token and what role it plays for you in your own design. And at the end, like the last stage is deploy, which is more about testing and optimizing. Like there's really good tools out there, like CAD and few of the other simulation things, where you can actually go and see how your token would create the value, or what could be the downsides of the tokens, probably a black swan event. But those are, I think, more probabilistic models, which probably does not really mimic the reality. But I think they provide a good insights in designing good ecosystem. So that's more a sophisticated approach that like the companies like Block Science, Gauntlet, which provides the services for major protocols, Uniswap or DYDX, or any of the big protocols, which has a lot of value locked in. And at the end, like ecosystem design is an art more than science, and the core of the entire framework is to iterate and learn from it. So, like if you just break down or see what are the different elements of ecosystem design, uh, there are three core things as a entire ecosystem. One is public goods, which is the infrastructure layer. Then there is DeFi, which is liquidity, and there is social gaming or network effects, where which is more about creator economy. And now public goods itself is the fundamental. Now L1 basically falls under the public goods, but then there you have tools like wallets, identity, virtual machines, RPCs, everything is infrastructure or public goods in a general. So if you think about public goods, there are also standalone public goods like RPCs, but there are also the merge of, let's say, public goods plus DeFi is basically oracles, or public goods plus gaming is basically, I would say, wallet as a service tools, which are basically the most essential critical elements to build an ecosystem. And if you're a project, you should really think hard on where you fit here, because you are actually creating a value for yourself. Like the product itself has a value, but then if you think about the other elements that you can build as a product or you can extend as a product, and what you actually bring to the layer one that you might launch with. And the one is main DeFi. DeFi is usually, I think, the most important element these days are the last layer, which is, I would say, the foundation layer, which is digital assets. I think the number of assets per chain is the most important metric to see, like how many good assets a chain has, or how many assets a chain could add, which fundamentally increases the entire utility of the platform, the projects deployed on top of it, as well as the different elements that could be uh, made with those tokens. That could be different DeFi building blocks, DEXs, lending, borrowing, liquid staking, aggregators, or even payments. So core is the digital assets, and this is where uh, yeah, most of the competition is. So I was just doing a research, a quick research for this. Uh, at this today, uh, at this day, there are almost 150 L1s and almost 80 L2s. Uh, and most of them are in EVM space. Uh, it's a cutthroat competition for the same market share. Uh, and I think it becomes difficult as L1s to attract more projects. But as a project, it's also more difficult to choose a good partner. I'll discuss those things in next phase, but I think these are the different dynamics. So just understanding or how to align the interest with L1s. So when you think about as a project, I think what you're looking for is, uh, I think there are a couple of things. One is short-term gains versus the proper long-term self-sustaining ecosystem kind of goals. Short-term is important to make sure that there is a proper revenue uh, to fund the team, to make sure there is an inflow of funds or the proper value capture. But essentially, you need a partner, or it could be L1, it could be L2. But at then you need a ecosystem to rely upon and build a project to get it to at least a level where you can prove that this product works and solves the problem. The entire cycle of a projects or the DFs has been much shorter than the L1s in general. And that's also one of the reason, like right now we are seeing a new trend in which L2s are going towards more of their L3 structure, which is like OP stack, uh, or Arbitrum has its own model on how they do that. Even ZK Sync has its own L3 structure. So everyone is trying to build a structure in which essentially they could capture the value back through the projects. And I think that we have seen this before. We are seeing this now. There are different ways the scaling works, horizontal versus vertical. Avalanche did it with subnets, which is basically horizontal scaling. But most of the things that we are seeing these days is vertical. Uh, but at the core, as a project, I think is very important to understand where you align and how long you align with the L1. And there's a very common trend of going from a chain to chain in search of grants, which probably is a good model for the short term. But I think most of the projects don't really make it to the end of the cycle. And I think that it's just because they are playing a short term game. But I think as a project, if you aspire for the long term, I think that basically aligns you really well with the entire goal of L1s or L2s, because even they are looking for a long-term sustenance as well as long-term value creation. And that's where I think strategic alliance with L1s or L2s as a project is super critical. Uh, I just want to pause here and see if you have any questions as a project, or if you want me to address anything specific.
I think we can take the questions at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, I think we can take it at end, but if there are any specific
For
things
sure.
right
Anyone
now.
has any questions, you can always ask right away.
Yeah, cool. Then I'll just continue. I think there's a different mindset for the projects. I think it's very important to perceive yourself as a country rather than just a project, because it basically runs into a very complex system. As soon as you go into tokens, you basically do the governance, which are rules, policies, which basically runs or dictates how your ecosystem would be used or how the product would be used. And you essentially rely on your users, which are basically your network effects. And to do this fluidly over the period of time is difficult, and to build at least one loop of doing these activities is something uh, I personally feel super valuable. And this was like this is not anymore, but there was a trend before that projects were not actually launching tokens or going away from the tokens due to regulations or compliance. But essentially, tokens could be pursued as a blood in the body, and it's really difficult if you don't have a token as a part of your ecosystem, especially if you are building an on-chain product. It does not really capture the value back for you. And basically, there is minimal scope for getting the network effects. And network effects basically reflects the volume that you generate and the velocity, which is basically the usability of your product itself. And at the end, it's all about how much other ecosystems and unlocking that interoperability. And this is exactly where Zeta Chain is placed. And we enable omni-chain applications where you can deploy a smart contract on or application on Zeta Chain, essentially control assets on different chains that are supported by us. Currently, we support BTC, ETH, and BNB. So you can basically create a product in which BTC runs as a native asset. Uh, but yeah, so at the core, it's all about bringing value to the other ecosystems, because that's where most of the network effects are spread out. So think about building a product on chain A and then also getting the uh, upsides of chain B, because you're a product that enables you to do that. But it's also more about building a positive sum game in which your product essentially also bridges the gap or brings value to the other chain, which is chain A to chain B. And this is where most of a good things or the value flow would be. So just coming back to the framework essentially captures uh, fundamentally three main things. Stakeholder mapping and value exchange mapping, as per my work so far, this has been the two of the most critical elements to for a project to understand who their stakeholders are, what they're exchanging, how they're exchanging. And once they are sure about that, I think the DLT architecture comes into the place. The DLT architecture or blockchain architecture in general uh, gives you insights into if it's a permission system, permissionless system, how decentralized it should be, how what should be the centralized elements, and this is critical for design. And as soon as you understand the architecture, you run into governance, like what on the creating the policies, on the rules of how one should interact with the ecosystem, what users would get, what should what is restricted, and tokens basically work as nudge to it could be subsidy, it could be a punishment, it could be anything that nudges people to do something, and economically just it just mimics the economic behavior of an individual with tokens. And that's where I think it's more iterative process to learn from your system, from the product, and products iterate over time. So does this models, and this in the design, I think the most critical element practically is the security threats. Uh, as soon as with so many different parameters, uh, you open up the space for different vulnerabilities and attack vectors. We projects that I've worked for, BNB, Zeta Chain, a few of the other projects before. This has been the center, the security threats of. We invest a lot as L1s to make sure that everything works well. uh, we cannot really afford uh, to just ignore the importance of this, or no one really does, because this is where essentially most of the trust is built, and trust is built over the time. So it's just about iterating for everything. So every protocol upgrade majorly goes through an audit, and this is super critical for any long term, just a vision for even mid to short term is very important to make sure that the audit part is taken seriously. And there are also audits which basically also give you insights into ecosystem. There are few firms which have started more ecosystem or more business kind of audits on where your token is coming from, or if it's bought, or if it's coming from a specific group of users who are holding the tokens. But I think that kind of analysis is also quite important to see where your core users are coming from. And then deploy stage is again the one that I discussed before. Yeah, so I think so far I think just want to discuss the entire frameworks, like the strength. The strength is like this is operationally feasible. I use this framework across different projects, L1s, and it works well. Uh, and it actually provides a better mindset for projects to understand, or individual to understand what should be the next step. And especially for the landscapes that I just showed it as a slide for public goods or DeFi or gaming. I think it really breaks down the into the details of each thing, on what is required in an ecosystem, and as a project, what more you could add to this landscape. And there are a few limitations of this framework as well. Like in itself, it is a bit complex system, and the entire goal was to break down this complexity. But I think it's a difficult thing to uh, pursue or just do each step. Like governance or token economics in itself is are different high level complex topics. The actually the core secret is to make it as simple as possible. But then the simple is also it's difficult to maintain over the time, and iterations comes in and it becomes more complex. And I think at the limitation of the model is also it does not like there's no direct answers. I think it's more about iterations, finding your insights and questions and putting it back to the hypothesis. And impact so far is like this model has worked. The framework, most of the projects have been able to use this to break down the timeline and understand where they need to work at the particular time, which basically fits in to the product, the quality of product, as well as what they bring to the table. Uh, the conclusion is this framework was done with research on different projects. So at the time of research, I did experimented the entire empirical model with almost 15-20 projects. The entire thing went through rigorous peer review, and then this was published. Essentially it works, but it's more about also how you bring in your practical experience to the framework and how you put that to the practice. Yeah, think we can start with the questions if there are any.
Yeah, thanks, Swam. Couple of things really caught my attention, and one of the factors was, when you mentioned that you should start treating your project not like a project but like a country. And,
Yeah,
yeah, because I think essentially, when you go about building something, you'll have to look at long term in a very way, and it to be to ensure it. And there are multiple things aligned with that. When you look at a country, you look at your internal mechanics, you look at your external mechanics as well. So you actually end up, while you're building your own ecosystem as a country, you're also trying to build an ecosystem with other ecosystems. Okay,
yeah,
so that's where probably the composability of the entire blockchain ecosystem is. Wherein while you do have competition, but there is always a scope of composability because one
yeah.
ecosystem working with
I
another.
think the entire scope or the fundamental building blocks of blockchain is to ensure that you can use elements of different projects, put
Mhm.
it together and launch your product on top of it,
Yeah,
which basically it's you're creating a value on top of someone else's value structure, and then you're maximizing the value of what it was before. And this is essentially, I think, as a L1 to L1, I think this is exactly where the value gets more intense. Because let's say uh, Solana, Ethereum does not talk to each other. There are bridges, but like essentially there is no communication between these protocols. But if a project could solve that problem in communication or bringing value of Solana to Ethereum, Ethereum to Solana, I think it just maximizes the user base. Because then you're not just competing with EVM user base, you're also getting the exposure to the Solana ecosystem.
absolutely. Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. No, interesting. I think I'll as another aspect to this thing is, while you look at, I'm just looking at the analogy between the country. I really like that idea because if looking at your own project like a country or your own level like country, you have rules, you have policies, you have citizens, and then of course you have internal security and then external security. So
exactly.
that's also part of parcel of building an ecosystem. One thing which can we just switch off this screen? I mean, so that we can be side by side and we can. Anyone has a question, please feel free to ask. Okay, we
Yeah,
are here. That's why I'm here. Yes, so I'll share your thing.
yeah. I think this is the one. So if you just want to put that out, if you're building anything omni-chain or want to build omni-chain, we have grants program at Zeta Chain. You can just find it on our website and apply there. And you can
Yeah,
also
yeah,
reach out
absolutely.
to me. Yeah,
Yeah, please, guys, and anyone who wants to reach out with them, please do that. And that's exactly where we all want to bring the call. What this masterclass is all about. I'm trying to bring the right people to the right places. But thanks, Swam. I mean, really, it was really important to know. My curiosity was, awakened when I really saw. It's very deep what you've done. Okay, it's very deep, and you've really done a lot of huge research. I mean, deep down into what exactly. Um, what about bringing the marketing and the growth perspectives in
yeah.
the
So I
ecosystem?
think if you let me bring that up.
Yeah.
Think if you essentially break down the token, there it is divided into two things, right? One is on the protocol layer and one is on the market layer.
Yeah.
And that's where the marketing is. Like if you see this market layer and the ledger layer,
Uh-huh.
I think token it's to stimulate both. One is you solve the gas problem or the validators with incentivizing with the gas fees, but at the same time you want to use that token for the market building, which is BD, which is marketing, which is yeah. I think essentially it's more thought leadership, and how your token essentially is just a medium through which this happens, but essentially it's about stimulating community and token as a part of it. So it just works as a reward mechanism.
So you also mentioned a punishment mechanism as well. If you don't do
Yeah, yeah,
something,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
then
It's a disincentives, right? So
yeah.
usually if you see the protocols, there is a slashing there. Like if validator is down for a while, but there's a slashing there. And that's always the part of the system because token is just nudge in the system. Like it's a reward mechanism, but it also could be a program for disincentives.
There's somebody called Ankit. Ankit, you can actually ask this question yourself. You can unmute yourself and you can come over and ask the question. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's
Hi,
Ankit.
Swayam.
Ankit, hi. Please introduce yourself and and talk to Swam.
Uh, yeah, hi, Swayam. I am the head of growth at Riot. So we are a Web3 education platform, uh, and we work with a lot of ecosystems to expand their developer training and onboarding. So the question from my side is, let's say you mentioned a lot of stakeholders in the ecosystem, like validators, projects, etc., etc. So I would love to know, like, what are the incentives that these stakeholders are generally looking at, and how are the best ecosystems catering to it?
Yeah, I think stakeholders are so as I mentioned before, the what each stakeholder is looking for is based on time. Time is a big factor there. So as a validator or investor, let's start with investor. So let's say if your angel investors or VC is part of your project, they are looking for the exit. They are looking forward to maybe they can support a project for a while, but essentially they need to get their fund back to their LP. For investors, what incentives make sense is token launch on time and making sure there is a good product and that supports with the community. So it's also marketing, BD, but essentially how genuine your product is. I think as soon as you launch token, uh, your network gets going, and the first part is the validators. Like, what does a validator get? They are looking for the rewards, long-term sustenance. Essentially, there's always a unfair advantage for validators who are joining first in the system. So I think there's a value for all Genesis validators in each ecosystem. So I think how you choose your validators, how what they enable as an ecosystem or what they bring back to the ecosystem are fundamentals. As a L1, what you look for, but as a validator, it's about how you create value for the project. And essentially, I think if you work well in creating that value, you'll probably reflect that in the price of the token and the rewards that you are accumulated. And same goes for the team, developers or the project. For projects, I think is um, because like the 150 L1s, 80 L2s, I think the competition has just become too intense, and every project or every L1 is trying to get a visibility of projects, and grants solve that problem of giving money to the projects to deploy. But essentially, the grants in itself is for projects that actually add value to the protocol level. Let's say if a project is coming and building a SDK or API on the protocol level, I think there is a very difficult manner to capture the value there. And that's where the grants actually make sense, because developers will probably not really be able to put monetary value to the SDK or protocol upgrades that they manage to do. But they still need to manage the team. That's where the grants are aligned. But if you go to a step beyond, uh, right now grants are mainly yeah, they are not actually solving the problem what it should. But it's just because of the amount of projects and amount of chains that we have. But essentially, I think it's also an opportunity for projects to find a strategic value with strategic chain and focus for a long-term gain, because then it's a win-win situation, a positive sum game for all the stakeholders there.
Yeah,
Thanks, Swayam.
I removed the share. So sorry. Want to say share again?
No, it's
Uh,
okay.
yeah,
You
Ankit,
just
Ankit,
take the question.
please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had another question. Since experience of doing this research on ecosystems. So I would love to understand like your candid take on the Bitcoin ecosystem right now. So like obviously there are a lot of L2s, and then there is like things like FBDC, like pegged Bitcoins, etc., and then trying to solve for it. Like how do you see that evolving over time? Like I've done some research, but I would love to hear from you if you can share your insights there.
Yeah, I think
Or or
as in
yeah, just another thing. So let's say if there are like if you were a part of one of these, let's say FBTC or like wrapped Bitcoin projects, how would you see like what would your strategy be to kind of grow these projects and
yeah, I think it's
ecosystems?
a good question. So I think fundamentally, the first question that I would ask myself is why Bitcoin? Like why wrap Bitcoin and why people value Bitcoin? I think it's all about the security of the platform, right? It's the most decentralized or something, the most trustless platform that we know in the ecosystem. And there is a value to it, and it had its own first mover advantage. It has acquired the value, it has acquired the network effects. Now, the entire Bitcoin ecosystem was inaccessible for the applications, given the protocol they have. Uh, we had some projects that came in, right? We had Rootstock, we had Stacks, which is doing the L2. Uh, we there's a RGB. There are different projects that have been working in and around Bitcoin ecosystem for years now. Uh, Essentially, I think what is happening right now, even with the L2s of on the Bitcoin, you're essentially staking the BTC, or you're locking the BTC and getting a new token out for your L2, which basically I think you're still undermining the security, right? So as a user, what I need is I rely on Bitcoin because of its security and the trust. Uh, as a project, I think I would really think how I can mimic this or how I can access this. So at Zeta Chain, what we essentially do is we actually access Bitcoin on Bitcoin chain, native Bitcoin, and we don't wrap it on our chain. Like there is a systemic representation of ZRC BTC, which basically is mainly used for accounting purpose on the chain. But essentially, the security of Bitcoin stays on Bitcoin, and that's where the value is. I think if you can figure out uh, how to keep that part intact, which is more into protocol design itself, and that's where the value is. And there are projects where there is a restaking of Bitcoin, and then you get the value out of it. Uh, Probably it's interesting, but I'm not sure how scalable that is, because essentially you are giving your the most secured, the security or the trust of Bitcoin to another protocol.
Thanks a lot. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ankit, for the question. We we are at the end of the session, and I think like to ask if anyone else has any questions, or else we will. Yeah, thanks to Swayam for spending his time with us and sharing fantastic, thought process. It's really deep, Swayam. I mean, what you've done, and I would love to catch hold of some of these slides for myself as well, to understand it more deeper. Because I mean, that's exactly what we are also doing. We're trying to merge ourselves with the ecosystems, trying to find out how ecosystems work and get them to come on board and work with our startups as well. So I think this is something that probably will really help us in many ways. Thank you so much, Swayam.
Yeah, I think essentially it's more about to give projects the tools to to enable them or to just empower them on how to think and how to position themselves at each stage. And that's where I think they get lost in different complexities of the ecosystem. There's also legal structuring and few of the external parameters that really impact hard. I think this framework is basically on-chain, mainly on-chain. But I think there's also parameters or ecosystem health that is required off-chain. And I think organizations like Pivot are important for projects where like they can find the first-hand support. Like we
Yeah.
as a L1s are always ready to help projects, but we essentially don't really have time to support each and every project or manas to do that. So I think we also like the maturity of the project. I think they're too early or they're too late. Like we need projects which are in the sweet spot where we can actually help them grow.
Yeah, thanks so much, Swayam, for your time. Really appreciate. I think we'll call this and really appreciate what you shared with people, and I hope all the audience will also understand what exactly is the motive here. Is trying to bring the right people to talk about something more important for their own project as well, for what they're doing. Whether you're a founder or CEO or you're just a person or you're somebody who's working with the ecosystems, I think all of this is important. So thank you, Swayam. I really appreciate your time. And this session has been recorded, so we will actually be putting it up on our YouTube channel for the people
Okay.
to watch it. Yeah,
Perfect.
for the people to watch it. Yeah. So we will do some post production and whatever we can do, and we'll post it on our YouTube. Or have a small summary of the entire discussion as well, Swayam, which will post as a
Okay.
blog. I will show that to you so that you know you understand. And for all the others who are there, still there with us, thank you very much. There's going to be another session coming up very soon on 12th of July, where we have bringing in Vijay Praveen from BitCrunch talk to us about data analytics and something more deeper into this. So yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I hope I added some value.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes without saying, man.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Have a good evening. Bye. Take care, guys.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.